If there's one Twins pitcher who might be flying a little under the radar heading into the season, it's Bailey Ober. And that's understandable because if you just look at the surface level numbers from last year, they're not exactly encouraging. Ober finished the season with a 5.10 ERA across 146 and a third innings. He struck out 120 hitters and only walked 31, which does still show pretty good command, but the overall results just weren't there. But I think there's a really strong case that Ober is a true bounce back candidate for the Twins this year. Because when you start digging into why his season went the way it did last year, a lot of it points to one pretty clear factor, and that is health. Ober dealt with a left hip injury last season, and that might not sound like a huge deal at first, but for a pitcher, that can affect just about everything. Your front hip is a massive part in your mechanics. I mean, just take it from another pitcher and myself. That's not nearly as good as Bailey Ober, but that's how you generate a lot of your rotational power after you plant with that front leg. So if that hip isn't fully right, it can really throw off everything mechanically and even affect your velocity. And that's exactly what we saw from Bailey Ober in 2025. His average pitch velocities were down across the board by about a mile and a half per hour compared to the year before. The most noticeable was on his slider, which was down roughly 2.5 miles per hour year over year. And when a pitcher who relies on command and deception loses that little bit of sharpness, the margin for error shrinks really fast. That's where hitters start making more hard contact. And in Ober's case, that contact led to a lot of damage. He gave up a whopping 30 home runs last year, which was the seventh most among all pitchers in the MLB. He's always struggled a little bit with giving up the long ball, but that's a pretty big jump. And it was one of the biggest reasons why his ERA skyrocketed. His strikeout rate also took a noticeable step back. For his career, Ober is striking out about 25 to 26% of all the hitters he faces. Last year, that number dropped down to 19%, and that's a much bigger drop off than it may sound like, because more balls in play just means more opportunities for hitters to do damage, especially when your stuff isn't quite as sharp as it normally is. And when you combine the drop in velocity, the drop in strikeouts, and the spike in home runs, it paints a pretty clear picture. He just wasn't operating at 100%, which brings us back to why I'm optimistic about the bounce back. Ober finally made his spring debut over the weekend, and the results were exactly what the Twins were hoping to see. He threw a pair of scoreless innings without allowing a single base runner, just a very clean, efficient outing for Ober. His fastball sat right around 90 miles an hour, which is right where you'd expect him to be for his first start of the year. And with pitchers, velocity is one of the easiest ways to gauge whether they're healthy or not, assuming that we start to see him sit around 91 to 92 as the spring progresses, touching 93 here and there. I think that's a really good sign that the hip issue is fully behind him heading into 2026. And if that happens, I think there's a very strong chance we see a much different version of Bailey Ober this year. Because when he's healthy, his profile works really well. He commands the strike zone. He does not walk many guys. And his pitch mix is plenty good enough to generate swings and misses. The combination doesn't always scream ace, but it absolutely works for, a number 2 or a number 3 hitter. And that's all the Twins need him to be. They don't need him to be a Cy Young candidate. They just need him to be a stable number 2 option in that rotation this year. If Ober can get back to pitching like himself, an ERA somewhere in the mid to high threes and over a strikeout per inning, that's a huge win for the Twins this year. And the encouraging part is that the biggest issue from last year doesn't appear to be talent. It appears to have been a lack of health. So if that hip injury is behind him and his velocity continues to trend back towards where it normally sits, I think there's a very, very real chance that Bailey Ober ends up bouncing back this season. But that's what I've got for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for Twins news and updates every single day. But until next time, I'm Sam Calder, and I'm out.